All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick's on the Power. So I've got an interesting discussion for you guys today, and that is relating to classic physique, specifically the vacuum pose. Now, Breon Ansley put up a post on Instagram earlier today, which a lot of people have been sending to me, and it's him hitting an ab shot. And there was a comment on that post that said, why choose abs over the vacuum when you can have both? And Breon said, I can do a vacuum, but it's overrated. I see overweight people doing vacuums, but not everyone can get deep separations, deep lines in their abs, which is a very good point. So the question to you guys is, how important is the ability to do a vacuum pose in the classic physique division? We're not talking about men's open bodybuilding here. So first, I wanted to give you guys the mandatory poses in classic physique because it is important to realize that technically the vacuum pose is not a mandatory pose, although it could technically be considered one. So we'll get to that in a minute. So for those of you that don't know, the mandatory poses in classic physique are front double bicep, side chest, back double bicep, abs and thighs, and then your favorite classic pose, which in many cases tends to be a vacuum pose from the classic physique pros. So Breon does actually have a point here. The abs and thighs is actually a judged mandatory pose here. So technically it would be more important from a judging standpoint to have those deep separations in your abs versus being able to hit a vacuum pose. But I think in the fans' eyes, on the other side of the coin, it's a very important thing that the guy in classic, a top guy in classic, is able to hit a deep vacuum pose because a lot of people consider that to be one of the defining qualities of a classic physique, a golden era physique. That's what people want to see. And I think that's an interesting statement from Breon from the standpoint that his number one rival is obviously going to be Chris Bumstead, and Chris Bumstead is known for his vacuum pose. The ability of Chris Bumstead to hit that vacuum pose, I think, is superior to many of the guys in classic physique. But more importantly, not just a regular vacuum pose, a vacuum pose while hitting the front double bicep, which is a mandatory pose, a vacuum pose while hitting the abs and thighs during the transitions of that pose, a vacuum pose during that favorite classic pose. So I think while the vacuum pose isn't technically a mandatory pose, I think in at least 3 of those mandatory poses, the vacuum pose could lend itself to be a great advantage to the person that's able to pull it off the best. Chris Bumstead doesn't really hit the best front double bicep without the vacuum, whereas Breon hits a really good front double bicep without it. So my main question for you guys is, which do you prefer, or which do you think is more important in the classic physique division? A crunched abdominal pose, having deep separation in your abs, or being able to hit a very deep vacuum pose? In my opinion, I think the ability to hit both is very important, and the ability to be strong in both is very important. But I would weigh the vacuum pose heavier on the scale of being more important, because if you can't hit a vacuum pose, I don't think you can be in classic physique. I think you should have that ability regardless of whether or not it's a mandatory pose, and I think it should be something that's included in any pro classic physique posing routine, because I think it's so important to the history of the sport. If you look back at the golden era, pretty much all the best guys, some of their best poses included that vacuum pose. I think the vacuum pose is one of the keys to really throwing back that division, because anybody can hit, any bodybuilder in men's open can hit a front double bicep, a side chest, a back double bicep, and abs and thighs. But you got to differentiate yourself from men's open bodybuilding. So hitting a front double with a vacuum, hitting an abs and thighs with a vacuum in the transitions, hitting a vacuum pose during your favorite classic pose, that's what makes you different from men's open. I think you can make the argument that having separated abs is important both in classic and men's open, whereas having a vacuum pose isn't important in both divisions. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. That's my opinion. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.